repatriating dollars and figuring out what's going to move the needle economically. The 33% that originate in Massachusetts does not refer to that overblown word of staycation. That does not mean people who are not going anywhere. That means people who live in Metro Boston and decide to go to the Berkshires, or they live in the Worcester area and they go to the Cape. So they're traveling over 50 miles and or staying overnight. 33% of our visitors are based in live in Massachusetts. That's a large percentage for any state to claim. It directly affects our marketing. We make sure that we have one message for people who are in-state and other messages for people who are out of state, have to travel some distance. Domestic visitors, 76% of them arrive here by car, so they're not experiencing Logan Airport or other mass transit so much. Their typical length of stay is about 3 days. The gravy train for Massachusetts is New York. Those are the visitors who spend the most here and who send the most number of people. It's also the most expensive media market in the country, so it poses some challenges for us. We have an extensive social and digital media campaign, which we initiated a few years ago for a variety of reasons, including measurability and economy. And one of the things we've done that you'll see in your packets is gone through the exercise of creating what's called a geo heat map, where we can see on a map of the United States where the visitors to our social platforms are coming from. So you can see the opportunities for us. These are not actual travelers. These are people who are traveling to our website. So we have some interesting opportunities in areas that we're not currently marketing, in particular the southwestern United States. As I said, we have an aggressive social media campaign. We communicate with about 2 million domestic visitors every year. We have internationally, we have campaigns in ongoing everyday campaigns in 7 markets. We have websites in 4 languages plus English around the world. We have representatives who work for us in those markets. Our top international markets are Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Japan. And the top reason they give for visiting Massachusetts is leisure travel. The international visitor, as you may know, books travel very differently from the way Americans do. 42% of them use a travel agent, and fewer than a third, quite a bit fewer than a third. I'd say about a third of them do their original research on computer, but they don't book on computers. That's for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they come for a longer trip and they're more likely to want to purchase trip insurance and all that stuff. The other advantage of international, or the other characteristic of international visitors that's important to notice, is they're not affected by weather. They don't. People who live in New England, when they hear that there's rain coming to the Cape, they might cancel, but people who live in Germany do not cancel. So they're weatherproof, and they're much more likely to come year-round. International visitors make up a big portion.
Might not come next year.
They might, right, that's right. That's up to our hospitality industry to bring them back. And we, as Tom mentioned, we launched, when Massport launched air service to Japan, we relaunched our marketing campaigns in Massport. The partnerships that he referred to, we are much more integrated with Massport than we have ever been in terms of their route development efforts and their marketing initiatives. Since there's been some changes at Massport, it's made a huge difference in the way that Massachusetts is integrating all of their resources. That's important on the international side. I can tell you that we have about $4.5 million invested in our international markets. No other New England state has as much as 200,000, so most of them are at 100,000. So we have a campaign internationally that far exceeds what our New England neighbors.
How is that? How does that used? Is that individuals who are there to talk to travel agents, or is it advertising? How do you spend that money?
We have fully integrated campaigns that include some consumer advertising. We particularly work with the travel trade. Those are tour operators. They're the tour operators who build the packages overseas, work with receptive operators here in Massachusetts who then receive the visitors and have their itineraries planned for them. Some of them travel in groups, some of them travel individually, but the travel trade is very, very important to us, and working with the International Travel Press to make sure that we host them for visits to Massachusetts, so they write about what they're experiencing. We host TV shows from overseas that come here, all kinds of documentary filmmakers, all that stuff, so that we will get broadcast and coverage and things. We also do less consumer, although we're about to launch TV ads in Canada for the first time. We'll be doing 2 flights, one in the spring and one in the early fall. Massachusetts has not done TV ads in Canada before, but there's a new first ever United States marketing campaign called Brand USA, which is overseen by the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we've entered into a partnership with them. So the issues that we see when I talk to the tourism people about the prospects of gaming here are a few. One is the repatriation, the loyalty systems that exist, whether or not any of the, I don't know whether any of the bidders have a vested interest in any gaming outside of Massachusetts, but if they do, we want, the Massachusetts industry is obviously hopeful that they will figure out a way to bring people back to Massachusetts. So they're spending money here. They all have these loyalty systems and others that may encourage people to stay there. People are very interested in branding and whether gaming offers the opportunity for enhancing our brand or diluting our brand. The many casinos around the country do not attach the name of the state or even any particular geographic information to. It's like if you see an ad in the Sunday New York Times for some very glamorous apartment building on the water, you have to read really fine print to figure out it's in Alabama or something. But a lot of the gaming facilities do not stress where they are located. And Massachusetts tourism industry takes our brand very seriously. This is a place that is known around the world. International travelers choose to come to Massachusetts. In some markets, New England might be the better known brand, but Boston is universally known. It's a first top tier destination for Europeans. It's on everybody's list of places they want to come, and there's a lot of concern about that. The tourism industry loves the idea of any enhanced assets. Whenever anything new comes, it's going to be Cape Cod rail service this summer. That's a great thing because it's a new thing. It's something we can talk about and make visitors understand that there's some new way to see things. So a new asset is a good thing if it doesn't crowd out the smaller businesses that have been here for many years and that really define the Massachusetts tourism experience. I know you know about there's a lot of interest in an open wall design idea where some existing facilities would be considered part of a casino so that some of the businesses that already exist could be integrated into these plans. There's also concern in the tourism industry about the lodging revenue. The lodging term is ADR, average daily rate, of Boston does very, very well and has worked very, very hard since the recession to get the average daily rate up for hoteliers, and they are concerned. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but there is some concern that casinos would offer discounted rooms which would compete unfavorably with existing properties. Happy to take any questions.
Can you talk a little bit more about degradation of the brand? The concerns about degradation of the brand. Is it the absence of a location in the advertising, those kinds of things, or is it something deeper than that?
I'll give you an example. A few years ago, before I started this job, my office ran a TV ad that showed a very complicated amusement park, a fun ride. And when my office tested that ad, people outside of Massachusetts thought that looked fun, looked like a nice place to go. People inside Massachusetts thought what are you talking about? That's not what Massachusetts is all about. We're about beaches, small towns, white picket fences, art galleries, a much smaller scale. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of pride in the tourism industry. Many of these businesses are family-owned. They're small businesses. Many of them have existed for a very, very long time, through generations. And they have, if you just think about Massachusetts and think about almost any other state, there are certain unique qualities that come to mind. And so I think they are concerned about, I know there's been some discussion just from what I read in the paper about the architectural design of casinos and so on. There's a lot of concern about whether or not these large destinations will add to, just be another wonderful asset, or whether they will crowd out the, brand is such an overused word, but the definition, the perception that people have of Massachusetts as a unique, interesting, innovative, spirited, historic place.
And how I've heard that before, I've read that before, that, to put it most bluntly, casinos not consistent with Paul Revere. But how does one mitigate that, or look for in evaluation criteria measures that casino operators will take to harmonize what they're doing and their marketing efforts with the existing attributes of Massachusetts that have been proven to be effective sales lures in the past?
Well,
That's an awkward question, but.
Well, I know where you're going. I don't think, by the way, that, I mean, Paul Revere was great, don't get me wrong, but we try to move past Paul Revere because, you know, been there, done that.
Right.
So Massachusetts tourism assets that are innovative, that offer green technology, that have some sense of newness and the spirit of innovation that Massachusetts has exemplified, are good things. When Massachusetts passed same-sex marriage, that became, from my perspective, a great advantage to Massachusetts, because whether you come here for gender equality or not, it helped the brand. This is a place where there's innovative thinking, it's welcoming, so I don't think it has to be ye olde, church tower, but I think that, for example, the convention center is, I think, a great asset to the Boston brand. The fact that it's modern architecture, that it's full of light, that it's got views that people don't have the opportunity to see, that it's got green technology, that's great. It doesn't have to be all, gingham curtains and all that stuff. But I think that what people are wary of is the big box, I could be in New Jersey, I could be in Las Vegas, what is it that feels Massachusetts-y about the place?
In the sense of excitement, innovation, bringing those kinds of qualities that you're talking about.
And I would argue there's sort of a dignity to the Massachusetts tourism experience. Most people don't come here, just in order to get painfully drunk and get tattoos. I mean, people come here for the immersion in art and architecture. They come here for boating. They come here for fishing. They come here for the great outdoors. They come here for cultural things. There seems to be some purpose to the reasons that people come here. We test visitors and to ask them, the number one reason why domestic visitors go anywhere is to visit friends and family. But after that, when we ask people why they come here, there's no one thing, and there's no, if you just think of yourself or your own family or friends, people like to do different things,
Right.
even within a small group, so.
Right. Yeah, I saw one of your slides said 27% are visiting art museums, art galleries, and the like, so that obviously is an important part of it.
Yes.
That's huge.
And
That's
those are
huge.
defined by, that's not
Yeah.
just the Museum of Fine Arts and the
Right.
Historic Garden, that's places all over the state. It's smaller galleries, it's lots of innovative, interesting
Right.
places. And there are things popping up all the time now, you know, you can go into South End and take glass blowing classes and stuff.
To some degree, I believe that the architects speak a lot about that point on their community linkages point. The AIA has given us this great white paper that creates this process for evaluating those community linkages. I would post it.
There are examples where casinos, resorts have really enhanced the tourism though, too. Is that something you've taken a look at as well, to see what's, excuse me, worked effectively in other locations?
I wouldn't say I have any great expertise on that, no. Sort of waiting to see what you all come up with, and then we'll deal with it. Our job is to market Massachusetts tourism assets. And, you know, I've got opinions on almost everything, but my actual job is to, to promote what is here, not what I think should be here. But I do think that the Massachusetts tourism industry does have some just great qualities. And there are people who work in them. I can tell you we hosted the National Governors Association here a few years ago, and for security reasons, the state police and Secret Service had to go through the staff who would be dealing with the governors and cabinet secretaries who were attending. And they had to, you know, hundreds of employees, not one of whom had been employed at the Sheraton Boston for less than 20 years, not one. And that's the back of the house, that's the front of the house. These are people who are, you know, committed to an industry that is providing a really important service. They do a wonderful job on behalf of the visiting public. They work very hard, and even if they're in a big organization like the Sheraton, they make a huge difference in the experience that people come here. It's a wonderful asset in Massachusetts, so we have so many workers who are international, who speak various languages and can welcome visitors. There are also businesses all over the state that have been in the same family, and they wake up in the morning thinking about how they're going to do it better. They have tremendous pride, and they do a very important job. They're bringing about $17 billion worth of revenue to Massachusetts every year with very little support. So.
Betsy, you've been great in the time that I've been on the commission, sharing information with us, relaying a number of the concerns that your network of Convention and Visitors Bureau has. I'll ask a couple of the same questions. Well, one of the same questions that I asked Tom is, who on your staff is somebody that an applicant can get to talk about not only maybe buttressing their application with facts and figures, but tie into the promotional efforts that you have, so that
They should come to
hopefully-
me.
Oh, they should go directly to you.
We do have a full-time research person, who I know you've seen some of his work. We do have a lot of great assets in the office, but it's just start with me and I'll take it from there.
Okay. You're looking at, I think I was blown away by the emerging market out of China, which has grown over 120%, I guess, since the previous year. A lot of that can be attributed to not only foreign visitors, but foreign students coming here with their parents. I'm probably, like everybody else, I'm blown away by the 47 nights that they generate per school year. My parents were prompt to just drop me off on the curb with my stuff and head back home.
Maybe if you'd gone to college in China, they would have
Well,
spent a
they
little
might
more
have stuck
time.
around for a couple extra days. Tell me a little bit about, if you can delve into a little more detail, because obviously China is an expanding gaming market.
Right.
What your plans are there, what you plan to invest in, how you plan to, I guess, promote Massachusetts through your efforts in China.
Well, we're in the process of developing that plan with Brand USA, which I mentioned is the first U.S. international tourism marketing program, which was created by the passage of the Travel Promotion Act, which was sponsored by Massachusetts Congressman Bill Delahunt. And Brand USA is an entity that does not use any public money, but is overseen by the Commerce Department. It raises money from departure fees on international flights for international visitors, and through partnerships with states like Massachusetts. I believe that we're in a partnership with them at a level that is that only a couple other states, sure, a couple other states are in there. So we're working out what that program would be. For starters, it is completely unlikely that we'll be doing any big consumer advertising in China because the numbers are way too high, and there are obstacles with online communications and others. So we start by working with the colleges and the tour companies that bring college students and their families here, and then with the tour companies in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the United States, particularly New York, that are accustomed to dealing with the Chinese market and working with them to build itineraries. We hosted some Chinese journalists who were here doing a sort of a travel show on U.S. destinations, and they were very interested. I mean, they say that when you survey prospective Chinese visitors, the one thing they can tell you about New England can be summed up in one word, and that's Harvard. So we have a head start, and there are tours of Harvard you can take even if you're not looking to go to college there. So that's our entree, really, but we're still building up the program. It will be through tour operators and through the business and student market. The business market is a big part of this because if people come here for a conference at the BCEC or they come here for, you know, a program at MIT or something, if we can convince them to bring their family, stay for a few days, see other things, that's a big part of what we try to do. So I would say that's still in the works.
Whereas Tom obviously has a better knowledge of the Boston market and the potential licensee here in the Boston market, you have the virtue of seeing the whole state. Focus a little bit, if you will, on the Western Mass market. How do you see a license applicant being able to buttress tourism activities in both regions?
Well, again, I have no unique expertise in the gaming stuff, but
But you have opinions.
I have opinions. We've established that. A couple things. First of all, as you well know, Western Mass, particularly Pioneer Valley, the sliver where all the colleges are, is already a fairly international part of the world with faculty and students from all over the place, and just by definition, a transient population, people coming and going, so there's a lot going on there already. There's a sense that in that part of the state, the casinos would be more of the destination, you know, not in the middle of a town that's already got a look and feel that they've been selling for some time. So I think there's also, as you know, in much of Western Mass, some pretty significant economic issues, which people are hopeful that the casinos will address in terms of employment. The parts of Western Mass have very few opportunities for young people who want to stay there, so I think there's some enthusiasm in that regard. But, you know, tempered with the concern about what happens to the existing, you know, some of the Western Mass tourism destinations. I mean, one of the biggest ones is Yankee Candle. That's a very sophisticated business. It's a charming place that people come from all over the world to visit, but it's not, and it is a mom and pop operation, as you know, but it's very sophisticated, very international. They're very involved with international marketing, and they understand their importance as tourism. So there's plenty of sophistication out there. In the Berkshires, the cultural organizations market aggressively in New York, where they are competing with, you know, for the visitation from people who make very sophisticated choices about where they're going and spend a lot of money, but their numbers are pretty small.
If I can give you a couple of examples of the casino industry increasing tourism. I was involved in New Jersey in hosting, or our organization hosting, national conferences. And if we held them in Atlantic City, we would triple our enrollment. It could be the most, a subject that I wouldn't find all that exciting, hazardous waste, for example. If we held a conference in Atlantic City, we would triple our enrollment. One of the other things I did recently is I served as a commissioner with law enforcement accreditation. And these agencies from all around the world have 3 times during the year to, their accreditation is up, they have to go.
Right.
And we hold them regionally 3 times a year because, we're worried about people's travel costs. 2 years ago, we held it in Las Vegas. We had the majority of the agencies from around the world who wanted to be accredited that third. So we really scrambled to offer incentives in the other 2 locations around the country. It really does make it more attractive for people
Right.
when they're when they're attending a conference to do it in a location where there are casinos.
Well, Jim Rooney can speak to this better than I can, but I can tell you that when conferences are held in a variety of places, and Boston is one of them, Boston gets more people already. When we've had any number of tourism conferences, including the National Governors Association, the attendance is higher when it's in Boston. So Boston already has that draw, and I'm sure Jim sees this all the time with conferences that are held in different places, and I'm sure that's right. The concern that people have is a casino going to be a cruise ship that people get on and they don't get off until they leave? So they want to figure out a way that people can enjoy the gaming experience and all the entertainment and dining and all that, but also see what else there is out there. I mean, there are very sophisticated dining opportunities all around Massachusetts, not just in Boston. And so they want to make sure that they're not just, kept out of it. And that's, I guess, the challenge facing you, to make it as you say, a great asset and a lure, but also getting people out into the world.
I would say the same thing that I said to Tom, that this is the time when we can get people to stretch. And if you have, again, I think we should probably have on our evaluation criteria that there should be, each of our bidders should have touched base with your office, and we should be assured that you think they have talked in the kind of language about coordination that makes sense. So that's one item that I think comes out of this. But specifically, if there are, you've got this marketing to China program you said you were just starting to work on. We're talking about the margins here, but with significant margins, and there are, our destination resorts are going to have an interest in that market as well. And maybe there's some relationship that you could suggest now people step up and talk about. Do you want our bidders to participate in some way or other, commit to marketing with you, dollars, coordination, whatever, towards that evolving program, or any other specific ideas? If you have specific ideas that would be enhancements of your work and your objectives that we could throw out there for bidders to step up to, that would be great. And the more specific, the better. And when the licenses are awarded, we will become like you. We'll become a proponent of.
Right.
We'll be pushing. We'll be coordinating. We'll be, as well as regulating. We'll also be advocates for this industry and for Massachusetts. But right now is where we have the maximum leverage. So any specifics that you can put out there that would enhance your work, that our bidders might be interested in participating in, please let us know. And
Well, they certainly work with the travel trade. I mean, just here in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
Sunshine Travel, for example, that runs all the tour buses multiple times a day from Boston and other areas outside in Metro Boston, Malden, Everett, some other places, down to Foxwoods or Mohegan Sun, whatever. The casinos are going to have relationships with those tour operators that already do that business. That's just domestic,
Right.
but they particularly cater to the Chinese-American
Right.
market. They have they have people on the bus who speak Chinese, so that's one thing. Off the top of my head, I would say another thing is that Massachusetts should be mentioned and prominent in their marketing stuff. We see this with the movies. We have the Massachusetts Film Offices in my portfolio, and Massachusetts was a little late to the game, and so we had not previously required that the studios put in the credits that it's made in Massachusetts. In some states, the film tax credit is tied to, Georgia, they have to put the peach, the artwork. So there are some, there probably are some, what would fall literally under branding.
Right.
That could be thought through in that regard.
Well, any thoughts you have about that, further thoughts would be great. You've talked about this, and this is, again, I know we're playing on the margins here, but they're important margins. We're having a meeting next week with the president of Mass Hospital Association and a consultant team that's coming up from New Jersey to talk to us about the medical tourism industry. It's enough of an industry that it's an industry. And when I talked to her, she was very interested in trying to figure out what we could do to coordinate that. Similarly, as you've mentioned, I talked to the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Harvard, and he said, without question, having the right kind of a destination resort casino here would help us compete against Yale and Princeton for some of the top students. You know, it differentiates us just a little bit more, and it would help us, particularly in some international markets. So there's a role that we can play in collaboration with those two key industries of ours in reinforcing and enhancing their marketing. And again, we're looking for as many particular, I know you're interested in and have a program in the student marketing, right, in the student family marketing.
Right.
So if there's anything in particular there that we could put out on the table to encourage people to do, we would love to hear about it.
When the top 5 markets, those international markets that send students to Massachusetts, that's awkwardly phrased, but of the 5 countries that send international students to Massachusetts, top 4 out of 5 are Asia.
Oh.
So that's definitely.
Right, right. Well, that's huge, and that's, you know, it's right where the sweet spot is, and for the big money in gambling. The whole idea of, you know, promoting, you know, these developers and casino operators are so far beyond anything I can imagine in terms of the sophistication of their marketing, but they do have these, as you said, these loyalty programs and these relationship programs, and so do you. You know, you've got lists, you've got social media relationships. If there's ways to create synergies with their social media and our social media, or ways to require synergies between their marketing, our marketing, some kind of access to or cross-marketing with their marketing lists, you know, whatever, you know, all of that kind
Right.
of stuff that.
When you keep in mind that Massachusetts' core domestic market is New York, that provides some guidance in terms of any casino or company that also draws on New York.
Mhm. Right.
There's a built-in tension there.
Right. Right.
On a more mundane level, it would be really helpful if you had the time when we finish our draft of evaluation criteria to take a look at it and see if there's any obvious things that we have missed or that would, not from your standpoint, be attractive marketing tools. We'll have that done in draft form fairly soon, and would welcome any input you have on the criteria we're using for our evaluation.
Anybody else? Thank you very much,
Thank
Betsy,
you.
for your
Thanks, Betsy.
several visits. Are we right to go ahead? Anybody need a break? All right. Director Rooney. Welcome, Jim Rooney, Executive Director of the Massachusetts, whatever it is, MCE, whatever it is, Mass Convention and
CCO.
everything big in the world authority.
I'll take another stab at that.
Right.
Good morning, I'm Jim Rooney. I'm the Executive
Good morning.
Director of the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority. We own and operate 4 assets, facilities in Massachusetts. What is not so new anymore, the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, which will celebrate its 10th year of operation next year, actually. The Heinz Convention Center in Boston's Back Bay. In Boston, the Boston Common Parking Garage, and in Springfield, Massachusetts, the Mass Mutual Center, formerly the Springfield Civic Center. We're in the business of attracting meetings and conventions primarily to Massachusetts. In Boston, we hold about 250 or so meetings each year. About 50 of those would be classified as major conventions, and by that I mean conventions that, by our standard, would produce more than 1,000 hotel room nights on its peak night. We, in total, generate about 700 to 800,000 visitors to Massachusetts each year, producing over 600,000 hotel room nights, and in 2012, about $560 million in economic impact. To generate all of that, the taxpayers, and Massachusetts has made about $1 billion in investments, particularly in the BCEC, in Boston and in Springfield, and upgrades to the Hines over the past decade. Given all of that and our relationship to the travel and bringing visitors to here, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today, and I applaud, as Tom did, the integrity and the transparency with which you're doing this. And I also applaud the signal you're sending that you're seeking compatibility and synergy and ways to leverage the introduction of casinos into Massachusetts to the better of all of us for what we're doing. That's clearly what we do. Some random thoughts based on what I heard Tom and Betsy say before me. One about brand. When we think about the way that we market and brand Massachusetts and Boston in the convention and meetings industry, it's a little different than many of my colleagues in the industry, in that we try to be true to who we are. And in fact, most recently, Boston was featured on the cover of an industry magazine and labeled as an intellectual destination. So we don't think of ourselves or market ourselves the same way that Las Vegas or Atlantic City or Orlando or New Orleans would in terms of what we bring to the table, because that's not who we are. And it is reflected in the types of meetings we hold. Most of our meetings are in knowledge-based industries, 35 to 40% in medical life sciences, a significant, that's our biggest segment, significant number of academic, financial, high-tech meetings come here.
30 to 40% is life science?
Life
or
sciences,
30 or-
medical combined.
Okay,
Yeah.
Wow.
So we do, that's our sweet spot. We're generally a high-priced city, and we acknowledge that. So we don't, we're not able to offer $99 hotel room nights. So we cannot market in price-sensitive segments of the market. So government types of events or fraternal types of events, Kiwanis, that sort of thing, where people are generally looking for paying out of their own pockets generally, and looking for opportunities to pay less than perhaps someone who's able to use a corporate credit card to stay. Our formulas worked. Boston had never been among the leaders in conventions and meetings before we opened the BCEC since 2006 in terms of market share. Well, Las Vegas, Chicago, and Orlando are far above everybody else. Boston regularly has ranked since 2006 in the 6, 7, 8 slot in terms of its market share. Last year, we had about 20 events that broke records for attendance. In those segments, people like coming here. People like what we have to offer in terms of medical institutions, the biotechnology industry, the academic industry, the high-tech industry, and so forth. So there's a great deal of synergy between what we're trying to accomplish in terms of bringing meetings to Boston, along with what the brand has to offer. We have a marketing and sales force that is broken up into several segments. We, of course, have a local sales force that does social ballroom events and small meetings and so forth. We have a national organized, geographically organized sales force with people assigned to Washington, D.C., Chicago, the West Coast, and so forth. And we have an international salesperson who works in partnership with Betsy's organization and with the CBB when we get into seeking international events. We're very successful, and I think something that will surprise, or does surprise most people. There's an organization, an international organization that ranks cities and countries across the world in terms of international meetings and how many are hosted in a destination. The United States by far is the largest hosting country of international meetings. But when you go city by city, many of the European cities, Vienna and Paris, are number one on those lists. But in the last 3 years, Boston has been the highest ranked international meetings destination in terms of number of true international meetings held. Washington, D.C. Is another one that does very well, but I think people are often very surprised to learn of the attractiveness of Boston as an international, truly international meetings destination. But overall, that puts us in about 46th or 47th place on the world cities scale, so there's plenty of room to grow in terms of international meetings. Another phenomenon we're seeing with respect to international is the degree of international participation in meetings. As I said, most of our meetings are medical life sciences, driven by associations. There's an association for everything in this country. And their business strategy is to grow membership outside of the United States. If you ask a medical association about their saturation rate within an industry, they'll tell you that 90 to 95% of the medical professionals in their field are already members. So growing more membership, which is what they're about, they've pretty much captured the American market. So the phenomenon, like in every industry, is for them to grow into the European and Asian marketplace. We're seeing that reflected in international attendance at conferences that are held in the United States and here in Boston. We do very well when international is a component. As we're sitting here today, the International Seafood Show is at the VCEC with over 20,000 people, 65 countries, and about 40% of the attendance being international. And while we do primarily concentrate on knowledge-based industries, I would be remiss in the high month of St. Patrick's Day, not to mention that we also are hosting the World Irish Step Dancing Championships at the end of March, which will attract 20,000 people from across the world. So I also want to mention, and I'll get into this a little bit more deeply, Springfield, we operate the Mass Mutual Center, of course. The Mass Mutual Center is a little bit different in that it is a combination small convention and meetings facility along with an arena that has about 6,500 seats. In that arena we have a professional hockey team, a professional basketball team. We host family events, Disney on Ice, those types of things, concerts, and the like. And in the convention center half of the building, we do regional types of small events that might be interested in that really third-tier market in our industry. In Springfield, it is sometimes a difficult market because we are competing with, if you think about the sort of geography, Worcester on one side, Albany on the other, Hartford, Connecticut to the south. It's particularly challenging for us as it relates to the entertainment component because we are competing with the casinos in Connecticut, and there's certain non-compete issues, difficulty that we have attracting major acts into the Springfield marketplace because of the dominance, if you will, of the casino entertainment that takes place just 30 minutes south of us. And I'll come back to that as well. As we think about the impacts, we think that of introduction of casinos both into the Boston area and to the Springfield area, our view is that they could be positive or negative. And, you know, as I mentioned, we have these facilities that represent substantial taxpayer investments. They were built for the purposes of hosting conventions, meetings, and in Springfield, entertainment and the like. So when you think about it, a facility in the western region that might be built to host entertainment or sporting events or anything like that would have a significant impact on what we're doing and what we're built to do out in Springfield. So our view is that anything that is built should not compete with the facilities that have already been built. And in terms of being able to host major conventions, I know that when one thinks of a destination resort casino, and you think of some of the international models or the Las Vegas models, some of them contain major physical components that would directly compete: convention space, entertainment space, that sort of thing. So rather than think about that, we've thought about, as is the tone of this conversation, seeking compatibility, seeking synergy, seeking to leverage the opportunities. And frankly, we see the greatest opportunity in the western region, and hope that whatever is decided out in the western region will be one that we will have the ability to have a coordinated effort in terms of bringing people to use the Mass Mutual Center in downtown Springfield. Naturally, we look at geographic proximity to our facility as key. So without tipping my hand too much about our preferences out there, facilities that are built miles away from downtown Springfield that have the potential to be drawing events away from the Mass Mutual Center doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. On the broader issue of sort of what these facilities offer and can offer to the industries like the tourism industry and the components of it, hotels, what we do, and others, I've thought of this phrase, destination resort casino, and what they are, and I'm not sure that there's any single definition other than, at least my perception, and I think a general public perception, is that they're somewhat built with a business model to think inwardly, to bring people, capture them, and in the most extreme cases, hold meetings or conventions, feed them, entertain them, house them, and then they don't create the synergy that we hope for, and certainly I don't think any of us want to see that. So I've sort of played with the words and thought that perhaps from a criteria standpoint, it should be flipped to resort casino in a destination, and to emphasize the fact that the objective here is to enhance the economic value to the entire destination and what is already there. So instead of this model that thinks inwardly, perhaps there's a model that thinks outwardly, and is designed to deliberately integrate into the features that are already there. And as I said, specifically as it relates to Springfield, if the thought process in selecting an operator for Springfield was filtered in that way, who is best proposing to leverage the tourism and hospitality features that exist already in Springfield, as opposed to thinking inwardly, I think that would be an interesting criteria to think about. A couple of other issues, notes I made as others were speaking, that I would underscore. Transportation, both in Boston and in Springfield, will be a huge issue. I actually sat on a panel yesterday at the request of Mayor Sano in Springfield. They had a public forum yesterday afternoon in which the proponents talked about transportation and entertainment and hospitality and what they were going to offer. And they talked about where people come from and how they're going to get there and so forth. It's a huge issue. I mean, there's already these economic systems that exist, and I think that the proponents need to be ready and should be ready through the criteria to demonstrate that the impact of what they're gonna do is somehow thought of in their plan. Now, as someone who listens to the morning news reports on traffic and hears that there's traffic associated with a big event at one of my facilities, I view that as good news.
Right.
You know, I understand that economic activity is going to generate traffic, whether it's at a stadium, an arena, a convention center, a casino. There's gonna be some traffic, but it needs to be managed, and I would think that, you know, one of the criteria is that a proponent would need to think about, you know, what their impacts are gonna be and how that should be managed in both regions. Workforce development, I'm glad Tom brought that up. It is a big issue in our industry, and I'll give you a little anecdote. We opened the Westin Hotel adjacent to the VCEC in 2006. We had job fairs, 550 jobs. And two things happened that I think sort of are noteworthy. One is that about half of those jobs were filled by drawing people from other places. So
Places meaning?
other hotels.
Oh, okay.
Other hotels in the local market. People just sort of jumped at a better opportunity, which is good, except that then those hotels had a backfill. The other half had absolutely no experience in the hospitality industry. They were just people looking for jobs and you know, needed to be hired. And I think in hindsight, we wouldn't say this at the time, it showed. It showed that, you know, we were running a 4-star hotel with people who had not worked in hospitality before. And we spend a lot of time in our facilities training people in hospitality culture and what it means to be in our industry. I don't know what the current projections of sort of workforce and jobs is as it relates to the casino developments, but I would submit that it, for their benefit and for the broader sort of hospitality and tourism industry, the issue of workforce development and labor supply is something that ought to be thought about. There is not a cohesive workforce development strategy. I think we're all kind of doing our own thing right now, so this may be an opportunity to leverage that. By way of expectations, you know, I think that as people have suggested to me or asked me, you know, what will it mean, particularly in Boston, which is, I think, probably where more people are focused because of the size of our facilities. What will it mean to us? And I've talked about sort of the potential downside if there is something that is built to compete with me. And it's been suggested to me that there is or could be indeed an upside. And to be honest, I think that it will be on the margins. I don't think, given where we go in terms of what we seek to attract in terms of conventions, I don't think there's a medical meeting planner that's holding back bringing their event to Boston until we get casinos here. We had a focus group about 2 years ago of about 18 major meeting planners that do business in Boston, and we asked them these questions. Their preference was that there be some geographic distance between the convention center and the casino, so as not to draw people away from the business of the convention, either the trade show floor or the meeting. You know, while they thought of it, and as I think about it, as a nice additional amenity, it will not change our marketing as an intellectual place that has leadership in medical, life sciences, and knowledge-based industries. We've just started using a tagline, borrowing from our friends in Las Vegas, that says, what happens in Boston changes the world. So that's kind of thematically who we think we are and how we intend to market. On the other hand, in Springfield and in the Western region, there is substantial opportunity, I think, for an uplifting synergy between our facilities and what might be built out in Springfield if there is a relationship that can be established between our asset and a potential casino development. The last thing I'd sort of mention is we've been on the sort of choosing side of proposed developments, hotels and other things for a long time. And you know, as we sit through and listen to presentations like I did yesterday in Springfield, that, you know, the two proposals have great visions and aspirations and all wonderful things that they're gonna do. And we just went through a major hotel RFP process. You know, we think about, I guess, 3 categories in terms of trying to understand and evaluate how to think about the proposals. One is the capacity of the entity to do what they're doing, and I know what they're proposing to do, and I know that you're thinking about that. So that's important. The other is the degree to which what they promise, propose to do, hold out as a vision, is intended to be a secondary amenity, a gesture of goodwill, a component of mitigation, or something that sort of they feel they need to do to win, versus an element, a key element of their business success factor. If they need to do it to be successful, the chances of it happening are greater than if it is just something they feel they need to do to win the bid. So that's one thing that we look for. And the last is the reality and enforceability of making sure that what gets said gets delivered. And nothing speaks louder in that regard than money. So we have, for example, in our current hotel, there's a performance deposit that needs to be made of $10 million that is non-refundable if the performance doesn't work. We did it the same thing with the Westin Hotel. And as things got hairy and things were going in the wrong direction, in that particular case, I think it was $30 million was sitting in an account that was going to be forfeited if they didn't perform. I think that's an example, but nothing speaks louder than some mechanisms for making sure whatever commitments are made, either with respect to the hotel development itself, or the casino development itself, or to some of the commitments that are made along the way, either local host communities or with respect to transportation and so forth. How those things are actually going to be enforced is important. So those are my thoughts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
As usual, Jim, really helpful, thank you. Commissioner McHugh, do you want to?
We've got a statute that says we have to have destination resorts. That's what these 3 things are. We've got an environment in the Boston metropolitan area for convention goers that you described. If you were in charge of creating the criteria for an award of one of these casinos in any location, what would be the top? What would be the top 2 factors you would be looking at?
Well, I guess one, if I could write it, I would limit the amount of certain space that people could build. In fact, I asked this question.
I'm sorry, you would limit?
The amount of space that would compete with others, including my facilities. For example, I wouldn't want to see anything that's defined as exhibit space in one of these things. I wouldn't mind seeing space that is associated with a normal major hotel type business of doing social events, business meetings, but not trade shows and exhibit types of things. So my personal preference would be that they couldn't compete with me or other venues like the World Trade Center that has 120, that's a small venue, 120,000 square feet of exhibit space. That wouldn't just be sort of taking an event that would be in Boston anyway and putting it at a different location. So that would be sort of one thing I'd look to define. I'd look to express that an objective is to leverage this opportunity and enhance the economic vitality of industries like conventions, hotels, restaurants, and others in the destination, and that's what I meant about flipping the words. And I wouldn't necessarily be prescriptive about how one would do that. I would look at how the proponent offered to do that. And I would judge the degree to which they were, as I said, inward-looking or outward-looking. And if their business model, and you can tell, I mean, whether they tell you directly or whether, you know, you infer from what they say, I think you can tell what their success, business success factors are. And if it is keeping people at the casino, then it really doesn't do too much for the rest of us. So I would look within their presentations to determine whether they are uplifting to the destination or whether their business strategy is much more inward-looking. And, you know, I think, again, I'm probably being repetitive, but, you know, I think that particularly in the Western region and particularly in Springfield, we all have a tremendous opportunity for something that can be transformative into the region, not just the city of Springfield. Because if we can at this point force the hand of proponents to think that way, how are you going to be uplifting to the economy of that region, and how are you going to integrate what you do into the existing assets, facilities, and needs of that region? I think we can achieve something great on that.
Our statute, of course, calls for us to have a regional focus as well as a host and surrounding community focus in citing these casinos and the like. Do you have, in your marketing efforts, do you have a regional focus as well? In other words, are you looking for people who come to the convention and then stay or come early? And,
so we do that primarily through the partnerships with the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism and with the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Eastern and the Greater Springfield Convention Bureau and the western part of the state. We think about it, although there's some overlap, is sort of we're the inside game and they're the outside game. And what I mean by that is that when we work with bringing a major event to the city, we're focused primarily on the execution and the needs of their event inside the building. Our partners at the Bureau will then market, and they're all regional, as you know, market the destination attributes, you know, the historic sites and sort of what exists within this region. As part of that, and this is what I mean by there is some overlap, we in all of our facilities have information and staffing available to help people understand what they can do while they're here. For many of the events that seek to do, you know, companion or spouse things, or, you know, come early, stay late, we'll help connect them in the ways that they need to be connected. So it's not our core objective. Our core objective is to get the 20,000 people here that are here today, and then allow for others who seek to benefit from the fact that they're here to do that. And we work the same way, for example, with the biotech industry. When we bring, you know, the bio convention here, we will work with the people who want to do business with them, but it's not sort of what we wake up in the morning thinking about.
Are there circumstances under which you would use the existence of a casino in a region where you have a location as part of your marketing effort?
Absolutely. I mean, once the casinos are in, they'll be in our marketing materials. Yeah, I mean, you know, as is Fenway Park, the Kennedy Library, you know, the Museum of Fine Arts. I mean, when we we market on two levels. We market the destination attributes and what your attendees are going to be able to do while you're here. And then we market the specifics. I mean, a meeting planner wants to know how many meeting rooms I have, how big are they, you know, how many chairs do you want, what's the kitchen look like. So they have very specific things. So our marketing efforts exist on two levels. To the 3,000 people who choose where meetings go, it's very specific and oriented to the ability of the destination to host that meeting. But for the broader attractiveness of the destination, sure, we'll be including all of that.
I'm not as familiar with the Boston market. The potential addition of hotel rooms, either in Western Massachusetts or the Boston region, does that help position you better for any exhibitions or conventions that maybe you can't get now because of that lack of hotel room space?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues, we're on a campaign now, we call it Top 5. As I mentioned, I think that, you know, we, starting in 2006, elevated Boston into the top 10 each year since. I think we're 8th this year. But we're stuck there. And when you think about it, my primary product is future time and space in a convention center and space in hotels. The biggest limiting factor that we have is hotel availability. There's about 20,000 hotel rooms in Boston proper, about 30,000 in Greater Boston. Occupancy last year was 79%, which is virtually full. You know, and anyone who's tried to get a hotel room in certain parts of the year know you either can't or you're going to pay $700 a night if you choose to. So it is, we do an analysis of every piece of business we lose. And hotel room inventory is a major factor, particularly proximate to the convention center.
Which means what, as a practical?
Half a mile, walking distance, yeah. That's what we need. We need more in the South Boston waterfront, and we need in the market, both in the South Boston waterfront, but in the broader geographic market, more price diversity. If you look at the hotel inventory that's developed in Boston the last 15 years, it's primarily 4- or 5-star hotels. It's the Intercontinental, it's the Mandarin Oriental, it's the Ritz. And that's all driven by hotel economics that we could spend all day on. But generally speaking, we need more overall, we need more in the South Boston waterfront, and we need more at a mid-price, a lower price level than currently exists in the city. So if, you know, one of the, you know, eastern, I guess, of Boston region hotels was to produce hotel inventory, I'm sure that we'd use it to the extent that they would be willing to play. You know, that's an issue in every city, the degree to which the hotel strategy is compatible with the convention and meeting strategy. And, you know, there's a couple examples, New York, Philly, Washington, where they see the convention market as kind of a secondary market, so they're not as willing to give up rooms to attract conventions because they have higher priced business travelers and leisure travelers that they can get as opposed to these discounted rate conventioneers. So to the extent that the developer saw it in their best interest to provide a block of rooms, the way that I do business is I will go to a hotel for a convention that's not going to be here till 2017, 18, 19, and I will say that I would like 400, 600 of your rooms, and I'll block them so that they can't sell them. Some hotels don't want to do that. They want to wait for the business travel or the leisure traveler to come in, and I'll negotiate the rate down for my convention. So some of them don't want to do that. So the short answer is yes, more hotel inventory helps. But, you know, where the rubber meets the road is on the business behavior once they get here.
There's a conundrum. You know, one of the interesting things you said was, if you're the criteria that you would use. This reminds me, Commissioner McHugh was leading the process for among other things, looking at the process of functional process of evaluating these big proposals. And, you know, Jim knows as much about this kind of stuff as a lot of people. It might be a conversation worth having, you know, as another conversation to pick his brain about how we do that. But one of the criteria you mentioned, the second one, was make sure that the cool vision stuff that they present to you is actually central to their success, not just Phillips that they're doing to try to win the business. We have made a big point about talking about we don't want just a big box with everybody inside. That's been one of our most, you know, probably strongest messages. As you know, the casino industry is changing anyway a little bit from that kind of a model, partly because the casino market's getting saturated and they need revenue from other things, shopping, and so forth and so on. But as a practical matter, it's clearly in their business interest to keep the people inside the building, you know.
In the
and
seat.
Pardon?
In the seat, on the seat.
Well, on the seat, most of all, but if they're gonna get up out of the seat, you want them to go to your shops, your restaurants, your hotel rooms, your spa. So if you were a casino operator and is there how do you make your interest as the casino operator compatible with that vision? As opposed to just doing the least that you can get away with to convince the commission that you're gonna at least go through the motions of trying to coordinate with the region and the community and the tourism around you.
Yeah. Well, I think that what is proposed to be built sends a strong signal in that regard, right? So, you know, I'm aware of the, generally speaking, the proposals both in the Boston region and the Springfield region, and, you know, as I understand it, for the most part, there isn't any real remarkable amounts of exhibit space, for example. So, you know, they're kind of sending a pretty strong signal that, you know, they're not,
Right.
their business strategy isn't to sort of host major conventions and events a la, you know, the Sands or Singapore or other places that, you know, have twice as much exhibit space, frankly, as I have. So there's that. So what's in there? You know, that'll tell you what their business strategy is once they tell you what's in there. And the second is the degree to which, as they are proposing and developing their relationships even today, they are intending to rely on something that already exists. So, you know, I'll give you two examples. Out in Springfield, I heard yesterday of one of the proponents that is developing a relationship with an existing entertainment venue. They're not going to build one, they're going to use one that's there. You know, there's another proposal that intends or proposes to link directly, build a bridge into our building. They're not going to build anything, they're going to use what's there. So I agree, Steve, that that the purest of business models is keep them there and so that, you know, each meet all of their needs. But you can, I think, look at what they're physically proposing to do along with sort of some of the strategic components of what they are intending to do as a way to kind of get at that. You know, I wouldn't say, you know, I believe in the capitalist system, so, you know, I'm not begrudging them making money and trying to sort of do those things, but how they strategically and cleverly think through achieving both, I think, is what might be interesting to ask for.
We have this clause, I'm sure you're aware of, about that the bidders have to sign agreements with live entertainment venues in their area.
Mm-hmm.
Is your facility in Springfield covered by that? Is that a live entertainment venue?
We'd like to think so, but I guess I'd have to
It may be a
admit-
matter of debate.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think If I remember right, we took a look at it, and I think there's some specific language in there that would make it a debate related to private facilities that we're not. So, that being said, that doesn't mean we don't try to leverage our presence.
Right, right. Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank
Jim.
you.
That was
Thank
really
you.
helpful stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
I wonder, before you leave, I'd like to ask you the same question I asked Betsy when she was here, and that is when we come up with the draft evaluation criteria of things that we're going to be using to evaluate bidders, which we'll do hopefully in the next few days. If you or somebody on your staff has time to take a look at that and give us your feedback, that would be enormously
Yeah, would be, actually enjoy the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for that offer.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll take a brief break. Hello, folks.
Hello.
Welcome
again.
back.
Thank you.
We will reconvene and welcome John and Julie. You want to introduce yourselves and take over? Thank you.
For the record, my name's John Nunnery, and I'm the Executive Director of AI Massachusetts.
And I'm Julie Taylor. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Noble and Wickersham in Cambridge, and work with John and a team of other people to prepare the white paper on the casino design standards.
So our thought here was to just sort of touch on some of the highlights of the forum itself and use those highlights to sort of talk about what we put into the white paper in terms of the recommendations, or how those highlights helped us get to some of these recommendations. Talk a little briefly about what the recommendations are, and then hopefully have some questions and answers about potential next steps. So in terms of the forum itself, we had a number of speakers, 7 speakers in total. Vernon Woodworth, who was our president, did an introduction and overview. Laura Warnick discussed some concepts of design excellence. Julie Taylor talked about the gaming statutes and design and sustainability. Mark Walsh Cook talked about sustainability features of high-performance buildings. Anne Marie Lebaneau spoke from the perspective of being involved with the Pittsburgh casinos and talked a little bit about what worked and what didn't work in that process. Alicia McDevitt spoke about the Clean Energy Center and the programs that that center can offer to prospective casino developers. And lastly, Easley Hammer spoke from his personal experience on designing casinos in Singapore and Las Vegas. After hitting those topics, we had our discussion back and forth between the commission members and our members, and what we heard was really a need for some help in 2 big areas. One, putting some design standards in place about what these casinos might be in terms of physically what they may look like and how they might be built. And secondly, a design review process to help you figure out, once you take these 11 applicants, how you actually review them to determine, to bring them down to the 3 that you actually want to grant licenses to, and then how you follow that through after you've granted the license, how you follow the project through to ensure that they're actually complying with everything they said they were going to do. So with that, Julie's going to talk a little bit about the recommendations that we made on the design standards, and then I'll talk a little bit about the design review process that we proposed.
So the white paper was the result of a lot of collaboration among a lot of people who have a lot of experience with design criteria. And we reviewed the gaming statute and the criteria that were explicit in there, as well as the authority that provided you to do things beyond what was explicitly listed there. And we came up with a list of 20 specific criteria that we called the Design, Sustainability, and Community Linkages Standards to try to suggest to you that you adopt these or use a similar framework. And the criteria were grouped into 8 categories. The first being overall design, the design quality, design excellence, including integration into the surroundings and tourism appeal, linking to the communities in which they're going to be situated. The second grouping of criteria was LEED, the energy and efficiency in design and materials. Third area for criteria was in energy, including renewables and equipment, monitoring of energy, and increasing energy efficiency. The next set of criteria had to do with operations, which I'd really like to stress that in terms of post-occupancy, that people tend to think of design criteria as something that you start with, but for purposes of meeting the statutory goals as well as sort of sustainability and quality design in general, you really want to be having standards that require ongoing operations to be monitored and tweaked to the standards that they were designed to, and the statute also requires improvement. So energy efficiency in year 1, in year 7, you want to make sure that you're not just going back to what is now old hat, but that you're continuing to require high standards. Next set of criteria had to do with community impacts from a couple of perspectives, including the sort of lighting and noise impacts on communities from the casino operations, as well as a robust inventory of community resources and linkages to those community resources, following up on sort of your last Q&A about how do you have it be outward looking. And I think having a requirement for a robust design review process that John will talk about a little bit more would help the developer fulfill the requirement to have the casino be linked to the community. Next criteria category had to do with water and water conservation. Another category had to do with climate and climate resiliency. In light of Superstorm Sandy, we learned the importance of that. And then the final was traffic and access, both the function and appearance of how people come and go from the casino area. So I will just briefly touch on that. The project has overall design and concept excellence, both the entire project as well as each element. You wouldn't want one beautiful building and everything else to look like Soviet bunkers. That the project is integrated into its surroundings in terms of streetscape and scale. And one of the things I'd really like to emphasize is that because these resorts are not just going to be one function, create, in effect, a small village, that you could have a casino, you could have a hotel, you could have an entertainment facility, you could have sort of pathways where people walk through, and that those pathways could be linked to the community. So it doesn't need to be one monolithic structure, and that's a way to have it be integrated into the surroundings. And the project has tourism appeal. That's one of the things that, in terms of having the success for the casino developer and operator, be tied into its own self-interest, is that the more tourism appeal, the more successful the casino resort is going to be. And that tourism appeal can link into the surrounding communities. Some of the most significant projects around the world are ones that draw huge amounts of tourists because of high-quality design, because of linking to the site. Whether it's the Bilbao Museum in Spain or other places where the tourism appeal is a big part of the successful factor. LEED and materials, we recommended that the projects and their elements be certified as platinum under new construction and major renovations. This is a sort of leveling of the playing field, that both renovation of existing facilities as well as new construction can be eligible for LEED and LEED Platinum under LEED NC, but also to take into account the community impacts in terms of LEED for neighborhood development, and that be a LEED Gold standard, and to prohibit certain materials on the red list. On energy, have each building in the project exceed the stretch energy code. Several of the communities are green communities and already require the stretch energy code, and the existing stretch energy code is easy for any developer to meet now, and you should set the bar not so high that they can't meet it, but high enough to set a new standard. The project should generate on site at least 25% of its annual electricity for renewable sources, which all the engineers will tell you is pretty easy to meet, and that it procures off-site the rest of it from renewables. And given that there are renewable energy credits in Massachusetts, again, that's easy to do and relatively short money, as one engineer said to me. The project would sub-meter and monitor all the major sources of energy consumption, part of the statutory requirements, annually maintain and biannually improve energy efficiency, again, this sort of continuous improvement, demonstrate that gaming equipment is energy efficient and other equipment is Energy Star labeled, that it incorporates district heating and cooling technologies. This can be a fabulous way with these huge resorts to have cogeneration of combined heat and power, to be a demonstration model and also to save money for the casino operator in the long run. Have at least one key building aim for net zero energy, and within 3 years actually operate at net zero energy, so that the on-site generation of energy equals or exceeds the energy consumed on-site. That's feasible these days. There's initial commissioning, there's annual reports that would be submitted. The project after opening would be certified under the LEED for existing buildings. There's a LEED criteria that looks to operations and maintenance. So again, it's important to not just sort of have your plan and put it on the shelf and be done with it when the building opens, but make sure that it continues to operate. Community impacts, that there can be benefits and amenities for schools, for children, for elders, for local organizations, whether it's community theater or whether it's making the space available, providing discounted benefits and tickets, having a community resource assessment process through the host community and potentially with neighboring communities, and have sustainability education programs for employees and visitors. In terms of water, to conserve water so that each building would use 40% less water than a standard building of that type and size, and promote reuse and recharge of water. The Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure has a lot of techniques to minimize the impacts of stormwater, which is not only from roads, but from the buildings themselves, from the roofs, and particularly garages. And to aim for net zero stormwater, but given that that may be technically difficult to do, to provide some off-site water savings mitigation, and that could be an agricultural project for if there's a project out in the Springfield area, or in the Boston area, there's a great need for stormwater collection and recharge, and that would be something that would be easy for a developer to come up with. In terms of climate, there's a lot of dialogue these days among architects and engineers about climate adaptation and resiliency, and how to think about extreme weather events and where you should place things and what the design should be. And that would be particularly important for these landmark buildings that are going to be having thousands and thousands of people in them. People don't always pay attention to the weather when extreme weather events is coming. The project can also be available as a community resource in an extreme weather event, so that if people are flooded out or lose power, that there would be the ability to use at least some of the buildings at the casino resort for sort of safe haven and a coordination for first responders. The traffic impacts of these projects are going to be immense, and that there's a requirement in the statute to mitigate vehicle trips and reduce impacts, and you will need to probably consult with a good traffic engineer about the best practices and the ways that that can be done. But even within the site, the parking and circulation, you don't want to neglect the fact that people are going to be walking from one location to another, and they're going to be delivery trucks, and you need to provide for safe function, as well as the visibility of how those things are going to work. And finally, that there would be at the time of the initial opening, access to multimodal means of transportation so that there are functioning public transit options, whether it's rail or subway or bus, and that there would be plans for linkage to, in the urban areas, linkages to the existing public transit system, and in rural or suburban, how it's going to be linked up to the RTA, the regional transit authorities. And then finally, we had noted that you could include in whatever sort of rating system that you come up with for the 20 or other criteria, that there be extra points, so that if a proposal suggested that it would work with a UMass Amherst or UMass Boston or Harvard and MIT to come up with an innovative demonstration project on renewables or energy efficiency or sustainable education, that would get extra points. Or if there was a proposal to partner with the State Department of Energy Resources on a demonstration pilot on renewable energy, anaerobic digestion from the restaurant and food waste, for example, that could also get extra points. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you.
Pardon me. On the design review process, one of the things that we heard was you were struggling with trying to understand how you would take these applications and actually figure out on the building portion of it, you know, what's a good proposal, what's not. And what we thought of was sort of a two-step process. One, that you would take the standards that Julie just spoke about, but in the first process, you would take those standards and you would use those standards literally to help you rank, if you will, the actual proposals per region. The second portion of the process would be putting together design review boards. So after you've ranked your proposals and you've decided on who you want to award licenses to, you would create these design review boards to follow the process from literally from giving the license, from concept design all the way through the end of construction and past. The design review boards, what we thought of was or what we're suggesting is a three representative design review board. One representative would be a direct representative of the Gaming Commission. A second member would be a member from the host community. And then the third member would be a member who's designated as the collective representative of the neighboring communities. The representative from the commission would be the official voice, call them a chair if you will, of the three. But it would be encouraged, obviously, that they should work to whatever decisions they come up with should be done in the form of trying to reach consensus. But in situations where consensus can't be reached, it still would be on the chair or the commission representative to actually be the voice of the commission. This person obviously wouldn't be speaking for the commission without consulting with the board or this commission, but that would be that one particular person's role. We're suggesting that the people that serve on this commission should have at a minimum 10 years experience in design and construction, ideally architects. We suggest that you might want to consider, if you like the idea of design review boards, that you would actually establish design review boards for the three actual projects, as opposed to one person who works for the commission sitting on all three projects. Our concern is these projects are big, they're immense, they're long, and that's a lot of work for one person to try to do. So you might consider either hiring staff or hiring a consultant to work in that regard. But again, this design review board, they would be your eyes and ears. They would be the ones who look at the standards that you approved when you gave the license, and they would work with the developer and the communities from concept design all the way through the end of construction to ensure that everything that was set up front actually occurs. And these folks would actually have the power through you to essentially stop the project if they felt that the project was going off track. If at the beginning of the project the development team offered X and 9 months into it X sort of fell by the wayside, the design review board could bring this to your attention and would have the ability to tell them to stop, go back, solve this, and once you've solved it, we can move on. that's one way to ensure that you're actually going to get the buildings that you want. And some of the issues that were raised earlier about making sure that the building process that we're talking about in terms of trying to link to communities, that is one way to ensure that you are actually linking with the communities and that the community process doesn't fall to the wayside by being able to tell them, no, stop, we're not happy with what you're doing. Go back, solve it, and then you can move along. Really, that is essentially it in terms of the design review process. There's a little more in the proposal here in terms of the details, but I don't particularly want to go through all of that now unless you have specific questions about it. What I think would be a little more useful is having a conversation with you in terms of what you feel was either good or bad in this proposal and how we might be able to work with you in terms of taking either the design standards and moving them forward into your regulatory process, so that the idea would be that hopefully these standards in some way are given to the 11 developers that you've approved that have to then come back and answer these questions as to how they're going to meet these standards. And also to work with you to figure out, you know, the suggestion that we've made for these design review boards, whether that's something you like or not like, and if there's other ways that we could do it, how can we work with you to do it? So I guess I would ask, are there questions from the commission as to what we've proposed?
I have a comment, and I wanted to be the first one to make this, because I really thank you and applaud what you put forward in this white paper. I think your recommendations are very good, on point, out of the statute, but really fleshed out and out of your collective experience as well in other jurisdictions. So I think you've laid out really well, holistically, but also very nuanced when it comes to things like differences, what transportation may mean in an urban setting versus a suburban setting, and you know, many other examples like this. So I read and reread your paper because it requires sometimes rereading and with interest, and I really thank you. And really think that we are, we should be thinking about the next step that you allude to, John, which is taking this into the regulatory process. When what is a smart regulation? You speak to much of that here. What should be a standard versus a prerequisite? And I was. Prior to this, I was personally thinking there were going to be a lot more prerequisites. It does not, the theme does not appear to be on that side. My read is that you are more on the side of meeting standards or setting standards, setting high aspirations, and letting the proponents really create, you know, bring together the best proposals, if you will.
Exactly.
And I also want to comment a little bit on the whole design review process, because I think that is key. One idea that I hope to take to other aspects of the application, like the finance evaluation. You speak really well to the building, the site, the building design, the site design, and the community linkages. But it has a tremendous parallel to what we will hope to accomplish, in my view, relative to just a purely financial evaluation. Some of these proposals will not come with 100% financing, for example, and having that kind of review along the way is going to be important. So I wanted to mention that now at least in my view, your recommendations are not just limited to the design element. I think they really transfer to other key aspects of the application. So, big-winded way of saying thank you very much for all the work that you've done.
You mean
Thank you.
in terms of the ongoing review?
Evaluation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was, I echo Commissioner Zuniga's thanks for the thought and care you put into this. These are, as he's put it so well, nuanced and very aspirational criteria and the notion of an ongoing review process, a team assembled to ensure that to monitor what's going on is an excellent way to address this, and I think other aspects of it as well. So
Absolutely.
He's already said it more eloquently than I can, but I do echo my thanks to what you've done, for what you've done. I was curious about the overall goal in light of what we've heard here today, and something we've been thinking about, I think all of us, in various ways. That is this, that you, Julie, talked about this as a little island, a little community or something, so we have pathways through it. And that is certainly what destination resort seems to suggest. That's the statutory definition. And yet we have heard from not only the people who spoke here today, but from others along the way about the need for interconnectedness with and an outward lookingness, if you will, to surrounding communities. It's one thing. So there's the first kind of dichotomy that occurs to me. The second is that the interconnectedness with the surrounding area is one thing in an urban setting where a casino is plunked in the middle of a vibrant or could be vibrant urban setting. And it's different, it seems to me, in a much more rural area. Not that the concepts aren't useful in both places, but they're different, and they're achieved, it seems to me, in different ways. Could you talk about both of those in whatever way you think would be helpful?
Well, as Mr. Rooney was speaking, I was actually thinking about that question, actually. And it seems to me you're sort of, there's two scenarios that came to my mind. When one was a casino that's totally inward looking, and they know how to make their money, they're gonna make their money, they're gonna build their building, and that's, I guess, the Vegas model maybe, or the now changing Vegas model. But there's an argument, I think, that could be made that says, if presented in the right way, it is more beneficial to the developer to truly reach out to the community. If they truly become engaged with the community in all its aspects, funding a Sunday parade, allowing the community theater twice a month to use their theater, sponsoring school sports, those sort of things, that it only works to their benefit. It only helps them, quite frankly, make more money if they are strengthening their tie to the community, because then the community will help, quite frankly, promote the casino, because they'll see a mutual benefit in their relationship. That's what I was thinking. And in terms of how do you do that, I think you can sort of, to a certain extent, do it through physical built environment, by making the two sit down, figure out literally what do these roads look like? Is it literally just a paved road that winds forever, or are there things that occur along that road? Could the casino developer be engaged with the community's planning department and be part of a master planning exercise that looks at the growth of the community? And literally, how is it going to grow? Yes, maybe this casino in a rural area does sit way out, sort of the Golden Road to Oz. But there is a community somewhere that you have to go through to get to that Oz. And one way might be literally to have them sit down with the zoning board and the planning board and talk about the overall master plan of the town. How do we want to build up development on that Golden Road that leads to your casino, so that it works for both of us? What sort of businesses should be there? What kind of, just what kind of businesses could be there? So I think that there are ways to do it. I don't think that there's any silver bullet that I can offer you right now that answers that. I think some of it will come out through the way they respond to some of the questions that we've phrased in the standards as to, well, tell us what your plan is for linking to the community. If the developer responds by saying, well, I'm gonna make a $500,000 donation, well, that tells you something. But if they say, well, I'm going to make a donation, but I'm going to do this, this, and this, that tells you something else. And I think that is a way to look at it. It may not be a perfect way, because I'm not sure that, again, that there is any real perfect answer to that question, but I think it's a start. I don't know if you...
Just a couple of further comments that I think if you make clear in your design standards package that go out to the developers that interconnectedness is a key criteria for you, that they will find a way to try to convince you that they're going to be more interconnected than anybody else who's submitting an application. And they will have creative planners and architects and designers on their staff, traffic engineers, who will be thinking about these issues. And so whether it's, promoting a new public square where there can be the sort of European public square activities and cafes around the edges, and whether it's something like that, or whether it's in a more rural setting and thinking, as John said, sort of how is the experience of the space along the road going to be, and how can it tie in to the sort of geologic and historical factors in some of the other buildings? How can it sort of promote some of the regional resources in the area? If you make that a key criteria, as I said in the presentation in the forum in December, if you require things of developers, they are extraordinarily good at convincing you that they know how to meet them. So just put a lot of the aspirational, put a lot of the high standards in the application, and that will draw out from the developers. The second comment, I think, is to also make clear that perhaps in one of the standards itself, and we didn't put it this way in the white paper, but that one of the design standards is in the initial stages a very robust engagement with the community on the design review process, on these issues of interconnectedness and the surroundings and sort of supporting the surroundings. And if you have that part of the process, if you have that kind of process being part of the criteria, that will function to bring out the best possibilities for the different site-specific locations.
And that is, to a certain extent, that's what the design review boards that we're talking about will do. So when you ask for it in the standard, when we say these design review boards will then follow the project, they will be there at all the local zoning meetings, at all the planning board meetings. They will be at all the community meetings that are going to occur just about what the design is. So it's sort of at that level that, as Julie said, these developers are going to be very good about telling you, here's why I'm better. Here's the way that I'm going to do it, which is better than this other person. It's the design review board that you can use to make sure that they actually do it and that they stay on track. And it could be, again, one of those things that
And
if
to
they
help
don't.
them do it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But if they're not doing it, then you have that authority to say, wait a minute, you got off track here. And, we can still pull back your license if you don't get back on track.
Just to give I think, pretty short example, when I lived in Vermont for several years, I was general counsel of a company that was based up there, and I sat on the Act 250 review panel, which is their state sort of major projects review panels, and there was a major sort of warehouse and type building that was going up in an area that was on an incredibly scenic highway, one of the areas in Vermont where you just go, oh, isn't this beautiful? And the developer came in with sort of, well, this is what he wanted to do, and we said, no, that's going to be glaring, and it's going to take away everybody's eyes from viewing the mountains and the lake views, and you need to make it recede. You need to use darker colors, and you need to do more landscaping to hide it. And I remember meeting with that developer a few years later, and he said, thank you. You know, you made our project a better project because of the back and forth that we required during these review hearings, that we wouldn't have thought about the colors receding and the landscaping and placing it over there rather than placing it over there. So a good developer can find a good review process helpful. And on the, including in the criteria, our proposed criteria number 15 under the community impacts does talk about having a community resource assessment process. So you might look at sort of beefing that up as a key criteria.
Can I pick up on those comments? This morning, I'm not sure if you heard our three speakers. I know you heard at least Jim Rooney, the one before you. But we, there was one of the common themes, if I could summarize, was along the lines of branding. And that the tourist that comes to Massachusetts is perhaps, or that Massachusetts as a tourist destination may be thought of as a more intellectual or sophisticated. And you know, there were a couple of comments along those lines. I'm wondering if you have some reaction to that or ideas. You talked to some degree relative to community linkages, and I think that's great in the context of the region. But I would be interested in your thoughts now or later relative to branding. I know that in the forum, design forum that you hosted a few weeks ago, Mr. Woodward talked about perhaps branding from a sustainability perspective.
Right.
That maybe casinos in Massachusetts could be the ones that have net zero or achieve all these additional.
Yep.
But if you could speak a little bit about that and or any other comments in that venue, I'd be interested.
I'll just very quickly say, I think that Massachusetts, it's not that I think, Massachusetts is a leader in energy efficiency and renewables, and the research at the universities that relates to Harvard and MIT, the Lowell Institute. So to be able to take that and sort of do fun stuff with it and have it be, you know, neat demonstration projects and things, and have it be family resorts, bringing more people in, not just sort of, you know, single gamblers who sit there and smoke all day or something, that you could broaden the appeal with a Massachusetts branding about sustainability and energy. And the other is just the, well, two others. One is sort of the university and the fact that there is such a wealth of resources here in terms of universities and linkages. But the third is the Massachusetts landscape. I mean, we have beautiful landscapes. We have hills out in the Berkshires. We have coasts on the North and South Shore. We have Cape Cod. We have water. We have lakes. We have, you know, we have hiking. We have, so all of this sort of recreational, outdoor, New England-y kind of stuff. So I think energy, university, and the sort of recreation in the beautiful, varied outdoors is, there's a lot to go on there.
Betsy Wall from, I think their point you're making is about the tourism industry is worried about branding the ideal of Massachusetts to international visitors, which was the subject of a lot of discussion, how we get them here. You know, Betsy was worried about the branding and talked about quaint little New England with picket fences, and all I could think of was we're going to build a 300,000 square foot salt box house to house one of these casinos. But she flipped it and, you know, did talk about the energy piece and the efficiency piece, and the pictures of buildings that you included from Massachusetts are certainly, I think, very well blend those two. I had three areas, I guess, of concern or question. The first is you talk about the use of LEED for neighborhood development rating system. And reading through the criteria that the neighborhood development rating system uses, it worried me or concerned me a little bit that it may tend to focus or favor an urban facility than a rural facility. I mean, access to civic and public spaces, agricultural land conservation, housing and jobs proximity. Is there a way to still use that criteria, but a way to blend it so it doesn't favor a rural location over maybe an urban location?
I think so. And we had a big debate about LEED, quite frankly, and it's in one of our notes about LEED, because LEED was a smart enough organization to grab onto something that they saw happening years ago, which was this movement towards sustainability, and they jumped on and grabbed a hold of it, and now we all talk about LEED, but the reality is it's a for-profit organization that we all use. So we had some concerns about the idea of saying, should you use LEED or not, which is why we, in this recommendation, we say not becoming LEED certified, but becoming LEED certifiable. Now, that being said, the sort of beauty of LEED at the moment is that it is a checklist, but the checklist is up to you to decide which requirements you want. So if you are in a rural setting as opposed to an urban setting, you can check off the requirements that this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm going to do, as opposed to, in the rural requirement, there may not be as much of an ability to tie into a public sewer system, for instance. But in an urban setting, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that you're going to tie into that system. So I think that there's some leeway within the LEED's checklist to allow for that. The other thought that we had, which could be a requirement, is something called the International Green Construction Code. And it's a code that has not been fully adopted across the country yet. It's still sort of going jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But what it is a code that uses the matrix of LEED in terms of a checklist, but instead of it being a checklist from a third-party for-profit organization, it's actually a building code, and it operates the same way, whereas you have a certain amount of points on the base that you need to comply with. I think it was like 14 points. And then there was a whole set of electives, and you could go per your project and choose the electives that you want. And there were certain standards that you would want to get to on the electives. You might want to get to 10 to reach a certain level, and if you want to go to the next level, then you want to get to, I think, 15 or 17 or something to that effect. The problem with that is Massachusetts has not adopted the International Green Construction Code because of the issues surrounding trying to resolve the jurisdictional issues, because that code actually gets into issues of water use, which, because it's a building code and regulated by one state agency, water use is regulated by a different state agency, and we haven't figured out how we're going to make that work yet, so the state hasn't looked at it. But that being said, it is a building code that could be used and could be referenced, and those standards that are in that code could be used by you or by those projects if you so choose. So they are building code language that hasn't been adopted, and it would be a process to work a little bit with the Building Board of Regulations and Standards to make sure that if you are going to use that for these projects, that we're using it appropriately and not circumventing the building code in some way. But it does allow for a process that is a little more geared, I'd say, than LEED to looking at suburban versus urban. And it's a very, I don't want to say it's complicated, but I don't think anybody's done it yet. So you would definitely be a trailblazer if you tried to do it. And
I have a question that sort of relates to your question, which is, are you going to be issuing draft regulations for public comment, or are you going to be sort of issuing regulations because of?
The former.
Okay.
The former times 2 or 3.
Yeah. Because I think that you can, any good set of government standards is always going to have some discretion built into it, and always some room for sort of exceptions at the discretion of the commission. And you can invite comments from more rural sites, proposals in more rural sites about how would they propose to meet the intent of LEED ND in terms of maximizing the benefits for the community and minimizing negative? How would they meet the intent of that requirement, given that it's in a more isolated setting? And the LEED ND don't, you know, I didn't give all of the criteria in there, but you can sort of rank different points within them, and there are some more rural community set of standards. It's not all based on sort of density of urban neighborhoods. So, I hope that's helpful.
That's helpful. My next, one of the big takeaways from the case examples you presented at the forum was the experience in Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
where, hey, that's not what we asked for. When you had a 2-story building and a 15-story parking garage right
Right.
behind it, right on the riverfront. I do look at the design review board as a way of kind of protecting against that. And I think a lot of people out there have questions and concerns about, especially in the host communities, is what we're being proposed, how do we make sure that's what we get at the end of the day? Can you give an example of where design review board has been used kind of in the similar manner in which you're suggesting on a project that we might be familiar with, or in Boston or nearby, or?
I think when we were first here, Mike Davis had made a presentation to you, who's the chair of the Boston Civic Design Commission. I think anything, quite frankly, that goes through the Boston Civic Design Commission or just the BRA in general through their large project review. I can tell you, I did obviously my background is schools. I did a charter school up on Pope's Hill that I remember we did our initial design, submitted it to the BRA, went through the large project review, and came out with a much different looking building. For good or bad, we built it, we liked it, we photographed it, we certainly marketed it. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but the point was there was a process. It was a public process that engaged with the city of Boston in that instance. And, a building was built from it. The client was very happy, the neighborhood was very happy, and they were happy because they were involved in the process. So I think that's the one that immediately jumps to my mind. I think you could probably point to every community that each of you lives in through your planning board and zoning board or school boards when they go through the process of designing a building. I right now I'm a member of my town's building committee, and we're doing a police master plan study, which also incorporates a school that's across the street from the police fire station. And tomorrow night, we're having actually our second public presentation on what it is we're thinking. We actually just started. We just had our initial meeting where we talked to the public about what it is we were doing. Now the second meeting will be, they've met the architect, here's what we're thinking. And it's a range of ideas. And we're literally opening it up to say, tell us what you think. Do you like this option? Do you not like this option? Give us your feedback. So I think there's plenty of examples. It's hard to really narrow it down to one specific that you might know of. But here in Boston, I think the BRA and the Civic Design Commission are certainly two examples that have a very direct impact on literally physically what these buildings look like in this town, city.
And I would also add that all proposals change from what they're first proposed, all. So don't
Absolutely.
feel like you would be doing something either detrimental or unusual by having a process that would require changes. All developers expect that reviews will result in changes.
One of my biggest issues with new technology these days is, I'm sure you've seen them, we've all seen the pictures in the paper of going back months. Here was the casino proposal for XYZ site, and you already saw what the building looked like with lights going up and cars driving by, and it looks like a finished product. And the problem with that is people see that and think, well, all right, well, it's done. That's what it's gonna look like. And it's a struggle that I've had and others in my profession have had of trying to get people to understand that, well, no, it does change. There is a process for this. It will change. It's literally just some keystrokes. And we'll make another rendering and it'll look just as finished as the last, but.
And even in the Globe, you saw
Right.
Sasaki came up with a very different, you know, reducing a lot of stormwater, putting stuff underground, you know, and like,
Right.
okay, that's, and you want something else? Okay, so we'll do something
Yes.
else, so.
But it is part of the process, that it does change from concept design on through. It changes less and less, obviously, the further you get into the process, just by virtue of building things and what things cost, and you don't want to be in the middle of your construction documents and decide to add 500,000 square feet to the building. That's not a particularly good idea. But things do change, and you shouldn't be afraid of that.
I had a similar question, or actually, I'm just going to ask. First, I want to thank you and your team for this thoughtful document as well. But with that 3-person review process, are you familiar with any other jurisdictions who license casinos using a similar process? I know you had folks, you met with architects from Singapore and other jurisdictions, but are you familiar with another jurisdiction, or did your research?
Lead us to that.
Yes.
Art, I would say that we did not do an extensive search for what other casino review processes have been, but our comments both on the standards and on the design review process were very much informed by the casino experience in Pittsburgh and by the experience in Singapore and the standards that they used, so.
And the two folks, Anne Marie and
Easley.
who respectively looked at those, agreed with, you know, this was a good first step. You know, we didn't, obviously, in this particular presentation, we didn't detail it to the nth degree as to how exactly this would work, but the overall concept of saying that you should get a group of people together that really should be charged with making sure that the project, whatever project is approved initially, is the project that is built, and that those people, one person should be from this commission, one person should be from the host community, and one person should be from the other surrounding host communities, and that they should be charged with ensuring back to you that this happens, that basic concept was a concept everybody wholeheartedly agreed with, because it does allow for communities to be heard. It gives them a voice at the table, which is clearly what the problem with Pittsburgh was they didn't have, or at least they didn't feel as though they had the voice at the table to advocate on their behalf.
But I think it would be a wonderful step for the commission or staff to take.
Absolutely.
I'd be curious, you know, one of the jurisdictions I followed is Ohio, even though Ohio introduced gaming in particular communities, there is a blend of new construction as well as building renovation. And
Mhm.
the investment size is somewhat on the same level and magnitude of what we're
Mhm.
requiring in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
Well, the Ohio, the site and the operator was selected as per
Right.
the referendum, so that's a key difference, but nonetheless, I think that
They move their process a little faster than we
It
did
would,
for
yeah.
that reason.
A little faster.
If I read the design review process right, you're talking about having the DRB would start before the licensing decisions are made. Is that right?
Not necessarily. I mean, they could.
You would use the process before the decisions are made, whether
Right.
you formally constitute a DRB.
You-
is
Okay,
not
so I
necessary.
couldn't tell.
You could put them together, quite frankly, and have them help you, if you wanted, with the actual
Well, the issue with that was.
first portion of it.
I wasn't sure where it started. So if it started in advance of the licensing decision, then I was gonna ask, what do you see as the role of the DRB in advance of a licensing decision? If you're not suggesting that it be there in advance of the licensing decision, then I won't ask the question.
Well, I think to a certain extent, the only way it can really happen in advance, in fairness, I think, is that you would appoint the 3 people that you want to be, let's assume you're going to give 3 licenses and you want 1 person to follow each of the license, that you appoint those folks and that those folks help you in the step 1 portion of reviewing the applications. I'm not sure, and you could probably make arguments both ways, but my initial thought is you wouldn't necessarily want to appoint the community representatives yet because you haven't granted the license yet. So they might be a little biased.
Well, you could.
But you could
But you
appoint
could.
someone who is familiar with community processes in a whole variety of
Right.
projects, in a whole variety of locations, you know, not promoting Anne Marie, but, you know, someone who's been through projects in urban areas and project in suburban areas and project in rural areas and, you know, has seen 15 different varieties of a community review process, that you retain 2 or 3 consultants to help you in the initial review of the
Well, I think we
packages.
will do that, but that's different from that's not the design review board, the idea that you had. What I was, I mean, so you're not specifically suggesting that the DRB would be in advance?
I don't think, I think there are ways that you could do it. I can envision, quite frankly, a way where, if you wanted, you could put together, say, a group of 5, I will say architects because we're architects, and you could charge them, quite frankly, with, I think you have 4 basic criteria in the general sense of what you're looking at in the applications. You could charge those 5 with saying, look at this portion, the building portion, and I want you to break them up into the regions, and I want you to rank the proposals, and they give those rankings back to you, and you take those rankings and then look at them in relation to the other 3 areas that you're looking at in terms of the casino license. The next step might be you take that 5-member group that you put together and pick 3 of them and make those 3 the people who will now be the individual representatives of the 3 design review board. That's one option. If you wanted to go that way. The other way is to just not bring them on until after you've made the selection of the 3 actual licenses that you're going to grant. Either one could work. But I think when we were thinking of this, I don't think we were necessarily thinking that they were going to be part of helping you select the 3 applicants.
The other thing I was going to ask about that was the post-licensing work is a lot of work that you've suggested here.
Yes.
In your mind's eye, would these folks be paid?
I would think that they would be, because it is going to be quite a bit of work, which is why we were suggesting, you know, you might hire them as consultants, you might hire them as staff, because the reality is, and this goes back to an earlier meeting that I attended here, just because the building is done doesn't mean the building is done. It's going to be there for a long time. It may have multiple operators, and it may have additions and renovations. One of the comments that we were talking about earlier was lead for new construction. The reality is, the minute you get your certificate of occupancy, you're an existing building and you're into a different part of the building code, and that's a different lead standard now for your renovations. So there is an argument that says these buildings are going to go through a lot of changes over the years, and it might behoove the commission to have staff following that.
And
But-
I would think it's extremely likely that most of these are going to be phased. They're not going to
Right.
build out everything in there. They're not going to do it all at once. They're going to build the casino and a hotel, and then they'll add a museum, or they'll add some additional parking, or they'll add other restaurants or something. I would think that would be much more likely.
And it's a decision I think that the commission would have to make in terms of, it seems you have 2 options. You could either bring people on staff that work directly for the commission, which you might argue you have a little more control over, so to speak, or you're hiring consultants who are working for you and just have a contract with you for a defined amount of time, who represent you, but don't represent you probably in the same way as a staff person might. But that would be a decision that the commission would want to make.
There is perhaps a third category of people, in my view, which are those whose job it may be at the host and surrounding community to think about economic development, for example, or other impacts. People that public works comes to mind. in some
People at
cities
the
and towns.
RPAs.
People at the RPA, people at the VRA would be, you know, in the case of Boston, you know,
Yeah.
still have to think about stipends and things like that, but there are people who could be
Right.
part of these process.
Whose job it already is.
Whose job it is, right.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
But picking up on the thing that both you and the chairman said a minute ago, maybe you answered it. One of the things we heard from Tom Glynn this morning, which is proven, I think, by Massport's experience, is the feeling of community participation in these developments leads to a community enthusiasm. And one of the
Right.
things about the design review board is it's got representatives from the community. So what, assuming we didn't have you couldn't have really the same kind of design review board in advance of a license award that you would have afterwards, what other mechanism is there for getting involvement of the host and surrounding communities in a design review process before the commission makes the award? You're gonna have the host community agreement, if you think about the flow, but that's gonna be an abstraction. There'll have been presentations, but that's, you know, that's what you just described a minute ago, Julie. That's somebody's got 3 clicks on a computer and got a design. And then we're gonna get the applications, and the applications are going to have people address with various schematics and other kinds of things and various responses to a lot of these criteria that you, if not all of them, that you said. And somebody on the behalf of the commission is gonna have to rank them and evaluate them in each of the regions. But is there a role at, and that's probably one group that can do an even-handed comparison. But is there a role at that stage for some community involvement in saying that this is a useful, this is a great design, or this is a great design but for this? So if the commission wants to award this, at least the community thinks that we ought to have more, I don't know, more flowers, more daffodils or something. Is there some way, have you thought about whether there'd be a way to do that?
The only thing that quite frankly comes to mind is almost it's almost a open public presentation by the commission that says, here's everything we've received.
Otherwise known as the dog and pony show.
Yeah, well, yeah, to a certain extent it is that, of here's what we've received. You as the host community and surrounding communities, you know, this is your day, come tell us your comments.
And we are required to do that by statute.
Yeah.
Barring that, I'm not sure what
that
sort of
could be-
formalized process you have.
But that could be facilitated by people who are used to productive and efficient community processes, as opposed to just sort of letting the public stand up and,
Yeah, right.
and make some
Yes.
questions
I
and
mean, there are
comments.
facilitators that'll help
Yeah.
with that.
I just, in that, I mean, surely we can do that and have to do that, and will do that, and do it enthusiastically, but some of this stuff is, technical.
Yeah.
And the average citizen isn't going to look at it. Some of the lead stuff, some of the aspirational stuff, some of the groundwater recirculation stuff, some of the things that might have been included but weren't along those lines are not going to be picked up unless there is a group charged with focusing on it. And maybe and certainly the commission's group will do that, whoever is advising the commission. But there may be some local flavor that needs a local board, a local group, a local something or other to focus on these things with the rigor and intensity that the general public won't give the community's view.
There are
It's
also
worth thinking about.
professional organizations that could help you consider the review of the proposals in light of specific communities. So ACEC participated in our forum, that's the group of engineers. There are the architects groups, there are planners groups, there are, the Mass Municipal Organization. There are a whole variety of people who are professionals who could help you sort of interpret properly the pros and cons, or the strengths and weaknesses, maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah,
I would.
but I was thinking and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I was thinking of the instrumental as well as the intrinsic value of the fact that the community is somehow participating on the front end
Yeah.
in a rigorous review of this thing.
To a certain
Has its
extent.
own value, apart from the results
Yeah.
it reaches.
Mhm.
What I sort of hear you saying almost is, almost that the commission would ask, let's say in the 11 communities, you are the host community. One of the requirements we might ask of you is to literally put a group of people together, internally do that, and review this proposal and come back to us, to sort of organize it a little bit, because it seems to me that's what the issue is trying to organize the thoughts of lots of people into something coherent to make its way up to you, so you can use those thoughts as part of your judgment process.
I would argue that that process is already taking place by virtue of the host community agreements and a separate one with the surrounding community agreements. And we decided that we would be removed from that process because we would later evaluate.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I'm talking about, if I was saying that, I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about after we get the application. The application, we're not gonna see the application at the time, in all likelihood, the host community.
But I think he's saying that, and I was having the same thought, you sort of were dismissive of the HCA stage. You said, well, it's just gonna be 3 clicks and, they won't really, I would hope that at the HCA stage, they would be doing precisely what you're talking about, that there would be
Talking about
really
water,
rigorous review, looking at the
traffic.
water, right, lots of community participation, culminating in a referendum.
Right.
So it's.
I didn't want to be dismissive of that,
Okay.
and so if we could somehow, without getting involved in the HCA process, encourage that.
Yeah.
Because you're not gonna, you're not gonna know, right?
That's-
Whether they're, what's actually being proposed, regardless of what the HCA says, until you see the application.
Well, I would argue that I tried to make that point unsuccessfully weeks
I
ago.
know, and you're still
relative
unsuccessful.
relative to dictating, for
Welcome to
example.
community process.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We did discuss the idea of dictating the type of advisors that host communities should have. And we decided not to weigh in on
All right.
that. One, we could have, but we didn't. And
Nobody liked that word
No.
dictator.
Well, I also remember specifically talking about issuing guidelines. Guidelines that, as an adjudicatory agency, we could put out and then evaluate, which some agencies do all the time. And I think that, to some degree, I know that process has already started without any guidelines from the commission, which is fine as well. I just remind us to those times when we did discuss these policy questions.
And I would say, Commissioner Mejigo, that to follow up on my comment about these review process always involve change, and developers expect change. The community process could start in a very robust way when the applications come in. And there could be a lot of changes, there could be a lot of feeling of engagement and ownership and relationship building between community voices after the applications come in. It'd be great to have everything all along the way and all at once, but I think it's hard to do that.
I have a question from a functional or operational standpoint from the commission's perspective. We've tackled or attempting to tackle, and maybe there's an appropriate role for the design review board in this, calculating a applicant's level of investment. 800 million, is it really 800 million, or, construction guidelines, et cetera, dictate a lower or higher amount. Also functionally at the end of the, an applicant will be required to set aside 10% of the investment costs. And at some point in the latter stages of construction and development, they come to us and say, okay, we need that 10% to finish. And we've toyed with the question of what type of internal help do we need to help make that judgment as to, are they really at that point where that money needs to be released? Would you envision a design review board could actually help us with those two functions of the evaluation
Yes.
process?
I mean, what I sort of hear in the second portion of your question is basically a retainage. The way I think of retainage is more concrete in terms of it's just a building. At the beginning of the project, 5% of the project is held in retainage until the end, and that 5% is then released as the punch list is completed on the building. But I think what you're talking about is something much larger than just the building itself. It's the overall project cost, maybe.
And they can request to get the 10% when they can demonstrate that the amount of money needed to finish the
Yeah.
project is
Is
less than, is equal to or less than the 10%.
And I think if you were to follow the suggestions that we made with making sure that you're bringing on people with design and construction experience, architects, others, I think absolutely they can help you with that, because that's what we do.
Yeah, cost estimating is a central factor for people who are involved in big projects. So
Absolutely.
anybody who has 10 years' experience with large projects is going to have some ability
Yeah.
to gauge cost estimating. This is going to be a different scale and a different nature of a beast, but you just need somebody who's good. And you may want to consult with the really big cost estimating companies at a couple of key points.
Absolutely.
And say, do an integrity check here.
I agree, because just like technology can help us produce what could look like a very detailed cost estimate, could be just one.
Couple
just
keystrokes
a
and
couple of-
it looks a
Well,
lot
and a
different.
cost estimate in year 2 is not a good predictor for a cost estimate in year 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cost of steel at various points has, ricocheted all over the place.
Yeah.
so.
We traditionally, with the projects I've been involved with, we generally do a cost estimate at the end of schematic, which is a little more than throwing a dart at the board. But it gives you at least an understanding. We're talking about a building that's going to be X amount of square feet. We know it's this type of building. We know these type of buildings cost generally about this much per square foot. So you can start to get your head around a project cost. But then the estimates continue from at the end of schematic design, at 50% of design development, at the end of design development, construction documents at 50%, 75%, sometimes 90%, and then 100%. So there's ample opportunities through the construction project to make sure that your numbers are.
One thing that's interesting about what you just said is that by definition, therefore, our bidders who are throwing these big numbers around really have no idea what kind of money they're really talking about.
At this point, I would honestly say, and I'm sure there will be knives thrown in my back from the development community for saying this, but it is not much more than just, well, I did it before. I've built one of these buildings before. I know the rough square footages. I know roughly how much building I'm going to build and the
I know what
approximate project.
the labor costs are these days in the Massachusetts
approximate cost
construction market.
will be X. The only thing, quite frankly, I think that's truly known at this point is a statutory requirement to spend at least $500 million in actual capital construction.
Right.
Besides that, it is, good educated guesses, but educated guesses
So to
nonetheless.
ensure that we are not just taking at face value someone that says $1.2 billion and someone else says 800,000, and not be more impressed by the $1.2 billion, we really need to get someone to evaluate.
Yeah,
and help us with
I
that.
suspect that they're gonna submit you a pro forma that shows why it is that way, but it's never a bad idea. I mean, in my world, we always have competing cost estimates that get reconciled. The architect will generally do one, and the contractor will do one. And they're never the same, and then you have to get together and talk about it. So it is probably worth your effort just to talk to somebody to get, is this, this is the pro forma they submitted. Does this seem to make sense? Are they playing with the numbers a little bit?
And there's always going to be a value engineering process that
Mhm.
goes on that, you know, developers by nature are people who, you know, are optimists and think that things are gonna work out fine and they're gonna make tons of money. And then they find out that, you know, to do this is gonna cost a little bit more, so maybe the skin of the building isn't gonna look quite as nice, and maybe they have to scale back, you know, the size of this, and that's where having the design review process and saying, you know, this is something that is required for you to proceed, so you're not gonna, you know, take off the nicely patterned canopy and put up a piece of plastic.
You're not gonna change it from Bilbao to the 500,000 square foot salt box.
Yeah, to some degree, yeah, one of our early policy discussions, I remember, because I prepared the recommendation, had the submittal of different stages of the design be always accompanied by the cost estimate, and, you know, and the schedule, because those three tools will allow the commission or any design review board to see the progression, to see the changes and cross-reference to what's now being drawn and estimated.
Yeah, and just on that point, that, you know, everybody wants the most beautiful building as soon as possible for the least amount of money. Those things don't go together. Something has to give, so.
I think our legislation requires that the buildings be gold, LEED gold minimum.
Or
right?
higher.
Or higher.
Right, minimum. Can you talk, is there any constructive way to talk about the cost benefit of a platinum? I mean, is it, if we were to require a higher standard, which we have the option of doing, what are the implications to developers of requiring higher standards? I mean, obviously, presumably it costs X amount more money, but is it readily predicted that that is recaptured under certain circumstances, or, you know, what, is there any ballparking that you can give us on that?
It depends on who you speak to. The upfront costs have been pegged anywhere between 7% and 15% for, you know, doing more energy efficiency, more things related to LEED upfront.
Over gold, say?
Just in general.
Okay.
Just in general.
Well,
But that the
see, but
payback.
here, what he said about people
Right.
differ, I mean,
Right. Yeah, well,
the
let him-
figures.
let
that-
him finish and then
The
I-
figures that I hear are more in the 1% to 4%
Yeah,
margin,
okay.
but.
Let him-
And, you know, it depends on who you speak to. Like I said, the numbers vary. I think the argument has always been that even though the numbers may vary up front, and that the costs are a little more upfront, and you can argue about what that number is, the long-term benefit, the payback to the owner, is worth it because you're making that money back over a 10 or 15-year period. I think what's good for, in this particular situation, is the developer likely will be the owner of this building and operator of this building, hopefully for quite some time, as opposed to a
Yeah.
different development
Right.
community that is literally just gonna build the building to sell it.
Right.
So they're not interested in paying those upfront
Long-term
costs.
payout, yeah.
So I
That's
think,
interesting.
you know, the reality of the standards of LEED is the higher you go, you could argue you might be paying a little more of a premium up front to go from gold to from gold to platinum. But the payback to the owner in terms of lower operating costs and lower maintenance costs will far outstrip those upfront costs that they may have
Over some period of time.
over some period of time generally.
Is that debatable? I mean, are there people who argue with that, or is that pretty established?
I think that's
You
a
can
pretty
argue the amount,
established-
you can argue how many years and so
Right.
forth, but it's pretty established.
The
that over-
basic concept of, yes, the upfront cost will pay you back over time, that, I think, is pretty well established
Yeah, if you,
case.
you look, there are some materials that talk about the overall costs of operating a large project, and personnel is, you know, the biggest bar. You know, it costs the most to pay money over years to people to do what you're paying them to do. And then there are some sort of building-related costs, and then the construction costs, and then the design costs. So the little marginal cost to move from gold to platinum, I would argue, might be almost nothing, because you're starting with a large-scale project, and the difference between gold and platinum is not gonna be very high. You know, the design costs to go from gold and platinum, what you have to pay architects and engineers, will be minuscule. The construction costs will be relatively small to go between gold and platinum if you're starting early and you're designing all your mechanical systems to be smart. And then you've got, 15 to 25 years of operations. And if you're requiring the lead in the operation and maintenance, that has been, unequivocally, demonstrably proven to save building owners money by having lead in the operations and maintenance, because by keeping everything at peak efficiency, you keep your electricity and water and energy, heating and cooling bills far lower than if your systems aren't working at peak efficiency, so.
What's the difference in cost if your facility or part of your facility includes existing buildings? So now, to meet that standard, you'd have to take that existing facility and bring it up to these standards. What kind of costs are we talking there?
That I don't feel comfortable giving any particular number on.
But it sounds like it's more.
It's more because you're dealing with an existing facility.
But it's
to some-
also
yeah.
more,
Right.
just to bring it up to code, setting aside lead and energy efficiency, it costs more to take a 100-year-old building and have it be access for disability, so.
I mean, it's a pretty standard thumb thing to say. I mean, the reality is renovation always costs more than brand-new construction. So if you just start from that premise, you can sort of extrapolate from there. The only thing I would say, Julie's comment was absolutely correct. The only thing that I would actually differ or disagree with is on the designer cost. I would argue, quite frankly, there is no additional designer cost if the design team is told up front that this is what you're doing. Their fee is not going to change because
Yeah.
it's pen on paper, it's writing specifications. We do that anyway. So it's just a function of what the material costs are going to be for the systems you design.
So the debate here is between 0 and minuscule.
On the
Well,
design
for
side.
On the design side.
Just on the design cost.
Yeah, I got that.
I think at some point, and I also don't want to be a dead horse, it becomes a question of where the opportunity cost of the investment dollars for a developer. I think that, a developer will assess the market and try to, the market for gaming, and say, we could build something here for X, and try to do that. And to the extent, and you made that point in your, the following point in your forum, to the extent that you're required to do something, they will factor that in.
Yeah.
If you're only, and they will do it, and that's not negotiable. Their contingencies will have to be, if something goes wrong, if they find ledge or they find unsuitable materials, it'll have to come out of another area, another pocket. If you're not required to do certain things, then that gets into the mix of what could become a contingency or value engineered as you develop the project. So this is why I was earlier thinking that some of your recommendations would be along the lines of requirements or prerequisites. But I think you speak well relative to what's already existing in terms of these communities, stretch code and the like, and that because some of this is already required by the statute or other building codes, we could just exceed in an aspirational capacity.
Right.
And there are developers including in sort of, resort and entertainment, like the office developers and residential developers who believe that it is a status, it is a brand, it is a positive thing to be able to say that they have a LEED Platinum. I mean, MGM's doing that out in its city center project in Las Vegas. It's doing a lot of marketing about its sustainability, what it's been able to achieve.
We're well past our end point.
How can we help you?
Anything else for our valued guests?
Do you have a
Very helpful.
timetable for when you plan to issue standards or something related to what we're talking about?
Soon.
Well, you'll see a draft of, an early draft of evaluation criteria within the next few days or week, probably, yeah. We're,
Few days, I would hope.
yeah, giving
But
us,
it's
yeah,
plastic, and your comments would be,
right.
would love to have your comments.
We're starting possibly this afternoon, but for sure on Wednesday, day after, wait.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, right. For sure, tomorrow afternoon, to talk about the draft evaluation criteria. So are they up on the web, or will they be?
Yeah.
Yeah, they will be soon, and we'll send them to you if you want to ask for them. So
Yes.
we would look forward to comments anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
As
much.
always, you guys have been really helpful, really appreciate it. Thanks very much. Do we have a motion to adjourn the 55th Avenue?
So moved.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Wow.
See you at 1 o'clock.
Those-